That was a super cool demo. I like seeing that. Also, nice ASCII art, in the terminal. That's if you have to stare at it the whole day, it's nice to be able to look at something fun. Next up, we've got something special. Mary.
Yes. Next up, we're welcoming Rosemary, Jeremy, and Scott, who are going to be having some tea and talking to us about maintaining a Terraform provider, among other things.
Hello.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Kareem. Appreciate the two of you introducing us. Well, hello, everyone. We're having a little tea time, I guess, with two of the maintainers, for lack of a better word. They'll probably correct me if I'm wrong, because they might be the person that you message on GitHub. But the Terraform provider maintainers, we have two of them today from the community. We have Jeremy Udit and Scott McAllister. Hello. If you could please introduce yourselves, what you do, and which Terraform provider you maintain.
I can start off. Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy Udit. I'm working at GitHub right now. Over the past 4 years, I've mainly focused on the infrastructure side of things. And in the last year or so, I moved over to maintaining the Pages product. And through that whole adventure, I was able to pick up maintainership of the Terraform provider for GitHub. And I think about 2 years now, been shepherding that community through new features and bug fixes.
And I'm Scott McAllister. I'm a developer advocate at PagerDuty. And I discovered the Terraform provider for PagerDuty shortly after I joined the company, and basically got involved with the project pretty early on in the time that I've been here. And just like Jeremy, I've basically been shepherding it for the past 2 years. So it's been a fun experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Both of you are sort of stewards by accident, I guess by accident of sorts. And I think that's what happens with a lot of Terraform providers. Someone sees the use or sees the value in them, but they need a maintainer. Do you think, I guess the one question I do want to start with is, did either of you have Golang experience before you started maintaining the provider? Oh, wow.
I did not. No, this was my first introduction to Go. I essentially came into the company and someone approached me probably not even a month in. They're like, hey, there's this thing called Terraform, and which I'd heard of, but I mean, they talked about how we have this provider. It's run by the community. It's supported by the community. It's been built by the community, but we need this one feature added. It'd be great if we could get you to do that. And I said, sure, why not? And that's how I got involved.
Yeah, my involvement was a bit more structured, but coming into the project, I did have some experience with Golang. So maybe a couple of jobs ago, I had a break between jobs and figured Go was a fun language to learn. So very studious about it, just picked up a book, did the exercises, and played around with the fun parts of the language. And then over time, ran into small projects, and Terraform, the Terraform provider was one of them.
Awesome. Now, for those who are hanging out in YouTube and Twitch, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. I am monitoring both. I don't know if you want to see how many screens I have up right now, but if you do have questions about Terraform provider development, maintenance, either the PagerDuty or the GitHub one, please post them in the chat. I will ask them live. In the meantime, we have a bunch of questions because as someone who has worked on some of the providers, I also have many questions. And I'm always curious to learn more about how different folks develop it. So with that in mind, I'm going to proceed to a couple of other questions that I have. The first is, this is tea time. What tea are you drinking? Or if you're not drinking tea, what beverage are you consuming?
For myself, I skipped on the tea. I had my tea earlier this morning. It's around noon for me, so I'm having a black coffee, which is a strange choice for middle of the day, but I had this to deal with, so more energy.
For sure. I'm on the west coast of the United States, so it's 9 a.m. for me, but not much of a coffee tea drinker, so I'm just on my water right now. But normally, I got a Dr. Pepper close by, so
Nice.
that usually comes in around noon. Not that I have
It's
my
not
life
too
down to a
early.
schedule, right? Some days it happens. Some days it happens at 9.
That's awesome. Yeah, someone's 9 a.m. crew reporting in. Yeah, that's definitely how I feel. I am drinking an iced tea. It is a Lady Empress Grey, which I'm not really sure how that's different than any Earl Grey tea, but anyway, it's pretty good. It's iced. All right, so we got that out of the way at least. And I asked a question about Golang experience before because a lot of people think that you need to have a lot of Golang experience in order to do provider development. I just wanted to set the stage that you don't necessarily need to have Golang. You can pick it up and you can learn it along the way. So other than maybe not having vast Golang experience with Terraform to develop a Terraform provider, what's the most difficult part that you found when you were trying to learn the Terraform plugin SDK for your provider?
I could jump in on that one.
Yeah.
I think this was definitely my bad early on. And it does speak to my intermediate and beginner-ish levels of working with Go projects. So I found that discovering the feature set of the provider SDK was a bit difficult. And it was all about just how I was going about it. Throughout my time at GitHub, I eventually switched to IDEs and got better link outs from when I was coding. And that eventually got me to the pkg.go.dev site, which is really great for just explaining what projects are about and what's available. So as I grew as a Golang developer and the tooling in the space, I was able to kind of get rid of all the difficult parts of learning about the SDK.
Jeremy, which IDE did you pick up?
So I moved from, I would say Vim originally, but then when I got to GitHub, I jumped onto the Atom train, and I loved Atom. It just worked. But then the plugin I was using for it, it just started to fall apart, and then everybody was jumping onto VS Code, and that's where I'm at right now. So it's still not perfect, but it's better in certain areas.
That's the one I'm using as well. I was just curious if there was a better one, right? Because VS Code seems to be getting me there. Yeah, for me, I think that it's a similar thing. It's just trying to discover what is possible with the provider SDK. So the thing that I loved about using the provider as a way of learning Go is that you already have this project set up and you already can see how things are done. And so you can kind of ease yourself into adding things and to seeing how, to architect things and to put things in certain spots and run data in a certain way. And so I enjoyed that. That really helped me out as far as getting to know Go. And honestly, the provider, like picking a provider that's already in production, already being used by a community, really allows you to have a kind of a launching point to get going. And as far as like learning things, I mean, yeah, learning Go is kind of a tricky thing. Just, getting back into, a language with pointers and things like that was a little, I had to remind myself how that worked because I had a lot of JavaScript experience before. And so, but it's been great as far as that goes. And what I have loved about the development of a provider is it's something that the original creator of the PagerDuty provider mentioned to me, is that he said the reason why he kept developing it and kept maintaining it is because of the community of people around provider development. They were so encouraging and so helpful that it just really kept him going. I mean, he honestly maintained the PagerDuty provider for 3, 4 years, 5 years until we got involved. So, I mean, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I will say I'm a VS Code person too. And even I learn a lot of tricks. I think I was on a live stream helping someone write a provider, and Patty, shout out to Patty, who's one of the plugin SDK team, hopped on and actually in the chat gave me tips to debug using VS Code, which I was like, I didn't even know you could do this. I feel like that was as a provider developer, right? That was the tooling that I wasn't even aware of I could use, right? There's a lot of feature functionality in VS Code specifically. I do know a lot of people who use Vim still. So, if you do, that's great. More power to you. I like the debugging tools in VS Code. All right. So there is a particular challenge or an interesting challenge with providers that have very little to do with the plugin SDK itself and everything to do with the API that you're working with. So did either of you have issues trying to design the resources and data sources because maybe your API endpoints for your target API weren't 100% great? Or did you have any trouble with some of the API's behaviors? Like they're not exactly create, read, update, delete, or there's pagination involved. Can you talk a little bit about if you've come across any of those challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I think on the GitHub side of things, we've got an API that's grown over time, and adapting the provider to that has been a difficult challenge. Outside of just our API itself, when we've implemented resources in the past, we've not been very future forward with it. It's more of like we'd release an experiment, maybe it works. It's just something that the community could play with, and then shave off all the rough edges over time. So working in that fashion, things about the API come up. So where pagination is needed because we're trying to create too many resources in a certain manner, and performance and timeouts, things like that. But getting back to examples with GitHub, so repository visibility is a really tricky one, where you'll have your code repository, you can make it internal, you can make it public, you can make it private, but there's side effects that come with it. And we found this out the hard way, where people started to notice that when they were changing visibility, all of a sudden some other setting over here got changed, which was unnecessary. I think at the time it was vulnerability alerts, and we were just rolling that out. The defaults are different. So if you have a public repository, it'll be, I think, on by default. If it's private, it'll be off by default. And then it just didn't play well with what we were trying to do, and super confusing to debug as well. So little gotchas like that, they'll pop up every month, where we're trying to implement against something that's eventually consistent in terms of feature set across all the different types of deployments. And we just have a lot of very excited people trying to jump on features before they may be ready for general consumption. So it's definitely something to look out for when working with your provider.
It's so good to hear that other people at other companies have these conversations with their engineering teams about their APIs. Yeah, at PagerDuty, it's the same thing. When you start really supporting Terraform and having Terraform being available for your whole API, it's starting to pull back the covers on all of the API, and people want the whole thing there. They want all the UI features in the API. They want it to be the same. And then you realize that using Terraform, maybe there's some corners in there that aren't quite thought through, or thinking through ideas of like some problems I've had is some folks have proposed API endpoints that had objects that didn't have IDs. And so it's like, well, I need to be able to have an ID, right? Like Terraform needs to be able to identify something. And we'd go back and forth, and then they'd see why we needed it. And then it actually helped make our API better. And then another one is how Terraform is, it uses the schema, right? The strictly typed fields and things. Folks building on our API like to have freedom to be able to have, dynamically typed objects. And so talking people through like, well, that's great, but then, it's a little more tricky to use with a Terraform provider, or to develop with a Terraform provider. And so one of the ways, and this, I'm sorry if this kind of diverts a little bit, but one of the ways to kind of help with those conversations that I noticed is that one of the first things I did when I got involved with the provider was to add a user agent header to the project so that we could see what traffic is coming in on the provider, who's using it, like, and how often, and is this thing actually being used by our users? And we discovered it really was being used by our users quite often. And so that really helps in those conversations, because then you say, well, this many, users or customers are using the Terraform provider and they're using it this often. We need to make sure that, XYZ feature is absolutely supported because these features or these customers are relying on it. So that's something that helped with ours.
It's really interesting. First of all, I've never heard the user agent recommendation. That's at least the first time I've heard about it. And that's actually something we should put it somewhere. We should put, first of all, we should write
That's a
somewhere.
great suggestion.
I know. I was like, wait a second. And the other thing is that I guess the question to this is that if you were to design an API from scratch and it was for Terraform, right? What are some of the things that you would suggest right off the bat? I know, Scott, you mentioned have an ID for objects. Is there anything that you can think of that you would tell that API designer, please have this because it would really help us for our Terraform provider?
The one thing that just popped in my mind is that responses, right? You want responses to come back, and you want the responses to have that ID and the object, because again, Terraform's expecting that. Terraform wants to put all that response in a state, and there's some API endpoints at PagerDuty that do not send back a response. So I mean, it's that would definitely be something I would suggest.
I think from the GitHub side of things, we've definitely been bitten by inaccurate documentation. So just if it's out there and we're telling the world that it works a certain way, let's try to make it functional. We've been bitten a couple of times on that. So just really good documentation really helps with the debugging efforts.
Both good things. We had a question come in from chat. Did either PagerDuty or GitHub run into any problems with eventual consistency on the API side while maintaining the provider?
Eventual consistency with data or with features, like in the API? Because like with,
let's say both.
I was gonna say
either
with
one.
data, yes, that is one of the struggles I've been having, is figuring out, there's a lot of dependent objects inside of PagerDuty that, certain things are dependent on other things. You need a user before you can create a team, because you need to add the users to that team, but the users need to be in the database before it happens, or something. That's a simple example. And so on a lot of operations over the last year or so, we've been trying to add a little bit of, once you're on camera, you can't remember the words of things, but retry, basically retry logic, basically just like, wait, hold on, wait a couple seconds, now try that. Okay, see, now that object's there. And so we've had to do that. To be perfectly transparent with that, the solution we came up with probably wasn't the best, because I was putting retry logic on each different call inside the provider. I probably should have put the retry logic into the client library first and just done it all there. But hindsight's 2020. So it kind of already passed the point of no return on that one. So.
As for GitHub, we've been pretty rock solid on data, eventual consistency. Like, I think a while back, there was a feature that we put in place because we wanted to ensure that our users would always read their own writes, and that's pretty much solved it for us. And definitely on the feature availability side of things, that's hurting us, because we've had features land in our V3 REST API and not in the V4 API, and the converse where it's just in the V4 API, and just not just those cases, but also the GitHub.com deployment, as well as on-premises enterprise deployments. They have a feature disparity as well. So that's a pain point for sure.
That would be tricky, having to deal with on-prem and not on-prem. That would be hard.
Yeah, it's where a lot of our discussion goes into in our issue tracker. And we were talking about this morning, we just have to have more defensive coding about it. Now the provider is being used in various different ways. I think at the beginning, it was mainly the GitHub.com deployment that it was written out for. But yeah, we'll have to get smarter in the code to abstract this from users so that they could just use it, it works, and all the ugly bits are hidden away.
Yeah, I think that's a challenging thing. And I don't think there's unfortunately no good way to solve the problem, which is when you have a lot of API versions and a lot of schemas across a lot of different tools and products. but it seems like it's good to hear from the two of you, right? And understanding maybe some of the different approaches that you've been taking to solve the problem, and some things to consider. For example, putting retry logic into clients. I actually did that the other day with a Vault plugin. So that was my mistake. It follows the same. It doesn't matter if it's a Terraform provider or a Vault plugin. You should just put any retry logic into your API client library, please. All right, we have a couple minutes left, and I don't see any other questions coming in from chat, but I did want to ask the two of you, what's the best way for someone to contribute to your provider?
I mean, for us, I think it's, submitting a pull request. Just kind of going through the GitHub project and doing it that way. I should say I'm a one-person team as far as reviewing those, and so it might take me a minute to get to it, but always welcome any changes and updates to our provider for sure.
A very similar answer over here. We use GitHub as well. Just the issue tracker. It's at one point I was overwhelmed by the amount of issues and bug fixes and feature requests that were coming in. So I had switched more towards a triaging mode instead of a let's fix everything mode. So everything is labeled. We have good first issues for people that want to come on board, and I like this discussion so far that highlighted that these types of projects, these providers are really great onboarding projects for people that want to learn Go. And I think after this, I'll try to augment our issues a bit more to be more towards that angle, because there's a good amount of work that's just small, and it's not necessarily in depth in terms of the amount of context that you need to know around the Terraform ecosystem. So yeah, just looking out for the typical good first issue would be a good way to jump in and help out.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I'll drop the links to the GitHub provider for Terraform and the PagerDuty provider for Terraform into the chat. You can find them on the Terraform registry. Jeremy, I think you're going to be giving a talk later, correct, about maintaining the GitHub provider. Awesome. So if anybody who's on the stream is around, please tune in later. That will go in depth into the GitHub provider. Thank you both very much for joining us for this panel. I have way too many questions and I didn't get to all of them. I feel like we need like a separate panel just about Terraform provider testing, because I think that's the next big part of developing a provider. But in the meantime, thank you both for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it to Kareem and Mary.
Hello, welcome back. Kareem, I can't hear you. I think it'll be me for right now, which is very okay. So I think right now we're heading into a little bit of a break. So we have about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll come back. I think we'll say goodbye to Kareem and we'll come back with me and Taylor after the break.